Joining me now to discuss this, Garrick, Professor of Law at the University of Queensland, James Allen. James, welcome to the program. I mean, this is huge news as far as I can see from this side of the Pacific. What can you tell us about the decision?
Well, thank you, Peta. Thank you for having me on the show. It was actually two decisions. One was a private university, Harvard, and one was a state university, public university, University of North Carolina, and same result. So it was actually the 14th Amendment for the public university, and it was via statute for Harvard, but any university that takes public money was linked in through Title VI. So basically the same. And effectively what they said is affirmative action is wrong, which they had said back in the late 1970s in this famous case called Bakke. The Supreme Court, in what was a terrible decision, had said you cannot have affirmative action. It breaches the equal protection. But what you can do is you can focus on all the benefits that flow from having a diverse student population. And that is what they overturned. And by the way, it was that Bakke decision which has led to the sort of burgeoning diversity, equity, inclusion bureaucracies around the Anglosphere, which have incredibly malign effects, especially in Australia, in our universities. And so basically what the Supreme Court said is not just that affirmative action is wrong, but that trying to sell this under the facade of diversity, because you have to remember, it's diversity of what people look like. It's not diversity of thinking or outlook or, political orientation. And so what you end up with is people with different reproductive organs, different skin pigmentation, but they all think the same. And it is these diversity bureaucracies that basically are strangling viewpoint diversity. I'm one of the few conservatives at an Australian university. It's a dying breed. There's tons of evidence in the US, Canada, and here that, it is becoming monolithic orthodoxies, our universities. And so people might have different skin color, they might have, different reproductive organs, but they all think the same. And so this diversity is not a diversity of anything important. It's a diversity of, unimportant things. So they got rid of that. And just to give listeners a little context, it was so bad at Harvard that the most discriminated group are Asians. And an Asian in the top 1% of the SAT scores in your high school GPA had a lower chance of getting into Harvard. So at the very top, they're basically in the 100th percentile, the top of the top decile, had a lower chance than an African American who was below the halfway point in the 40th percentile. And, a white student had a lower chance at the very top than an African American around the 50th percentile. And the way they really did at Harvard is they would take these school results and then they would ask students to do a little personality test. And this is going to shock you, Peta, but apparently no Asian has an acceptable personality because they all scored terribly on the personality tests. Some of them weren't done in person.
Yeah,
they just knew you had a bad personality because you were Asian. And so the group that was getting slaughtered were Asians. And so, they have every right. It wasn't whites who were doing the worst under Harvard and these diversities. It is a direct attack on the idea of meritocracy. And the Supreme Court said, we're going to try to put a stop to this.
James, so hearing you there, do you think we're going to get an extension of this beyond the college campus? Are we going to get a revision of the way boards are selected or the way that companies hire against a diversity criteria? Is it going to flood out into corporate America, do you think?
Well, firstly, you have to be careful. One Supreme Court decision does not end this. Let's be clear about that. Harvard and all these universities will bend over backwards to avoid this. I mean, many U.S. universities have already said they're just going to end SAT scores. So here's the irony. You have these elite universities, some of the best in the world, and they will no longer look at student scores. They will do anything to keep this going. And so if you think this is like a giant super tanker, trying to turn it around is very difficult. It'll take years of litigation and many more Supreme Court decisions. This is just a start. There won't be any noticeable difference for a while. As for how it's permeated out into the wider sort of corporate world, well, you know as well as I do that HR departments and the big sort of law firms and corporate HR departments are some of the most woke, most focused on group identity, critical race theory. It's already permeated out there. I mean, if you want to pick the worst place, go into a big Sydney law firm with you better have your pronouns stuck on your chest somewhere, because some of those big law firms are about as bad as it gets. And if you think that future judges are going to be better than today's judges, you just don't understand what legal education is in today's law schools around the Anglosphere. It's only going to get worse.
I tell you what, we'll watch it closely. James Allen, thank you. That was such a good rundown. Appreciate your time.